Thank you all for joining us today for this exclusive two-part series focused on Microsoft Intune. We truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to engage with Revanti. Revanti is a Microsoft partner that has a team packed with expertise in all things Microsoft. The team at Revanti is ready to help organizations deliver a more collaborative, more productive, and more secure experience. A few housekeeping items. This is a live event that is being recorded. We will be sharing the recording with each of you. If you have any questions on any of the content presented today, feel free to enter them into the Q&A window, and our team will take action to help answer them. Our speakers for today, Lai and Yasai. These two gentlemen come loaded with a deep wealth of knowledge around Microsoft's tools and its impact on end users. And I know you will walk away with more insights on endpoint management and Microsoft's suite of tools by the time this is over. All right, enough from me. Lai, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shane, and welcome everyone to part two of our Microsoft Intune briefing webinar. I'm glad you guys are all here today because we're going to be discussing a lot of good topics as pertains to Windows 11 upgrades, as well as streamlining the device setup for new devices. We have a pretty packed agenda today. First, we're going to dive into the previous webinar and just go over some of the topics we discussed in the previous webinar to give the attendees who were not able to make it in the previous session to really understand what we're here to talk about. From there, we're going to dive into the Windows 10 end of life, discuss the different options that are available for customers when it comes to Windows 10 end of life. We'll discuss upgrading to Windows 11, utilizing Intune and Windows Update for Business. And then Yasai is going to demo the actual update process using Intune. Yasai is also going to dive into the Windows 11 device provisioning process with Autopilot and then also demo that. And then we're going to finish it off with some best practices and considerations, some final thoughts and key takeaways, what's next in terms of action items, as well as some Q&A. Okay. So just a recap of the previous webinar. First, we dove into the modern world IT challenges, and we explained all the different challenges that organizations face in the modern IT world. Right? We expressed and explained how the cloud is prevalent and utilized in most organizations. We discussed about how the remote work and more frequently the hybrid work is seen quite often within the workforce, and it's a gradual increase in that scenario as well too. We discussed about the continuous updates that we're seeing when it comes to Windows devices as well as devices in general, and then the increase in security threats when it comes to endpoints, right? And all of this essentially adds to the some of the challenges we have when it comes to flexible work arrangements, right? Flexible work arrangements has leads to an increase in endpoint security because now there's a lot more devices on networks that are potentially unprotected, right? We discussed about how organization leaders feel pressure to provide that increased productivity, but while also reducing operational costs, and how to really continue to provide that same capabilities when it comes to the flexible work scenarios. And then we discussed about the influx of data and emails and meetings and really outpacing the human's ability to process it all. And so really looking at ways and capabilities to really help and address all these different IT world challenges. From there, we dove into the modern world, the journey towards modernization, and really discussing on the topics of how to simplify and continue to provide access to end users on various device scenarios, but still keeping in mind all the different security components and all the different safeguards that needs to be put in place. right? So, providing the productivity doesn't mean we're taking away the security, right? We need to make sure that security is top of mind, but we still need to but we need to balance that with simplifying the endpoint management and still providing access to end users, regardless of the different type of work they have, whether it be hybrid, on-site, or remote. We then also jumped into the discussion of what is Intune and provided some information about the capabilities of what Intune can do. Intune essentially is once again is not just uh, a mobile device management platform. It manages mobile devices, it manages workstations, it manages and pushes applications, virtual endpoints. Right? It is a all-encompassing solution, and it aims to, as mentioned, simplify endpoint management, fortify that zero trust security concept, and really improving the end user experience, right? Wrapping it all up to making Intune a full suite of products that really focuses on all these different points. Right? And then from there, we jumped into the topic of why Intune and why organizations decide to use Intune, and we provided four major components that we see across a lot of organizations. Is that the first one? It's a unified management platform that manages both company-owned devices as well as bring your own devices across all the different platforms, including Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Android, iOS. We also mentioned about the integrated capability and value when it comes to Intune being able to integrate across all of Microsoft portfolio, integrating with different solutions and really providing a unified, comprehensive security. We also mentioned and discussed about the built-in automation capabilities that Intune has, really providing that streamlined device setup as well as really enforcing the policies when it comes to devices. And lastly, Intune itself is a cloud-centric platform. There is no infrastructure that customers have to maintain, and it makes it easier for the remote work to have that accessibility to a cloud-centric platform to manage their devices, but also access their corporate data and their necessary resources. Okay. So diving into today's meeting, what are we here to really discuss, right? So today we are focusing on first Windows 10 and transitioning away from Windows 10 due to the Windows 10 end of life. So for those that have not are not aware, Windows 10 end of life is on October 14th, 2025. And this applies to all Windows 10 versions, including Enterprise, Education, Home, Pro, IoT as well too. And what does that mean when it comes to end of life, or also known as end of support? So technically, Windows 10 will still continue to work when October 14th hits. However, organizations will no longer receive some of the following support when it comes to technical support, feature updates, or new features, as well as quality updates, specifically security and reliability fixes. This means that your Windows 10 devices will have a higher risk of potential security incidents and security threats, right? Um, and so definitely there you need to really consider the different options in transitioning potentially away from Windows 10 to Windows 11, or some of the other options which we'll show in the next item here in this next slide here, to really address the end of life date. So what are the available options when it comes to Windows 10 end of life? The first is most likely what a lot of customers and organizations are going to be implementing and rolling out, which is upgrading any compatible devices uh, from Windows 10 to Windows 11, right? And that's probably the less impactful, the easiest component or easiest approach is performing in place upgrades. Uh, in addition to that, replacing existing devices and refreshing it with brand new Windows 11 devices is also an option that organizations can take. Now, of course, with that, you're essentially providing new devices to your end users, and you have to consider different components of copying files over, transitioning, profiles and so forth to make sure that new devices have all the necessary in all the necessary data and apps that they've had previously. Another option is transitioning to virtual desktops such as Windows 365. And in that scenario, it allows users to utilize a virtual environment to access their data and their corporate applications and so forth, without having to upgrade their current desktop, right? Now, we still recommend upgrading the desktops, right? We don't want to have Windows 10 devices that are unprotected or do not get necessary security patches and updates, but that allows users to be able to transition to using maybe BYOD devices, right? Or Windows 11 home devices that they personally own, but then connect to a virtual desktop, right? And then lastly, the fourth option is enrolling in a paid and extended security updates program for up to 1 year after the end of life date. Uh, the key item for, or the key requirement for this is that the Windows 10 device must be on version 22H2 in order to enroll into this program. And this program is a per device program, meaning that the customers have to pay a certain amount for each device, and it will uh, Microsoft will provide up to 1 year support for that device, uh, after which the customer or the organization has the ability to extend that extended security updates program for another 2 years. So in total, you have of up to 3 years of extending that support. But after the 3 year mark is over, there's no longer any additional extension on that, right? And really, that scenario of utilizing the extended security updates is really for companies that have legacy applications and legacy services that cannot be transitioned, or their Windows device cannot be transitioned off of Windows 10. And that's a hard requirement to keep it on Windows 10, right? Our recommended path is to look into upgrading eligible PCs to Windows 11, utilizing Intune, as well as transitioning to new Windows 11 PCs with device refreshes. And really, the option of the ESU is extended security updates is really the last ditch option that we recommend our organizations use. So moving to Windows 11, there are two major ways of doing it. The first is leveraging Intune and the Windows Update for Business to perform an upgrade, right, to Windows 11. Um, and Yesai is going to really be showcasing kind of how that works and how to use Intune to perform that activity. And the second option is replacing and refreshing Windows 11 devices using Autopilot for a streamlined device preparation. That basically means getting the device ready for that out of box experience, ready to deliver to your end users, so that way they can boot it up and get into their day to day activities. Right. So with that, I would like to pass it over to Yasai. Yasai is going to jump into and discuss about the Windows Update for Business, as well as demoing the components.
Thank you so much, Lai. And hello, everybody. It's Yesai Children here. Happy to be here. And today I'm going to talk to you about how to upgrade your Windows 10 clients to Windows 11 using Microsoft Intune and the Windows Update for Business service. So let's first talk about the Windows Update for Business service. Now, Windows Update for Business allows you to automate pushing those Windows updates to your device endpoints, right? So by creating the necessary policies, you have some granular control as far as when the updates are received. So you basically create what's called update rings. By creating those update rings, you actually specify different components of that update process on the user's machine. So you control things like the deferral period, you control things like the grace period and deadlines, and you control the auto update behavior when the updates are pushed, set things like active hours, things like that, right? So it gives you some control as an administrator to actually set these policies, set these settings for your different device groups. Now, many of you probably have different device groups across different locations, so you can create multiple of these policies to actually push them onto your devices at different times of day, different times of week, specify different deferral periods as far as when they're released and when they're pushed out to devices, right? So that will help you with all of your security and your quality updates. Now, in addition, one of the big components and the reason we're here today is the feature update, right? So think of Windows 11, the different features. So we're talking about Windows 11 23H2, we're talking about Windows 11, say 24H2, right? So these are different major releases and what's called feature updates. So we can use Windows Update to actually push these feature updates to the machines and create separate policies for these feature updates. Now, how that plays a role with Windows 10 is think of these feature updates policies as a way to upgrade these Windows 10 clients to the latest Windows 11 version by specifying a feature update and then applying that policy to your Windows 10 clients, which can automate the upgrade process from Windows 10 to Windows 11, right? Imagine if you didn't have that, how would you actually process that update? You'd have to get on these machines, run the manual update process, right? And it's really hard to facilitate, especially for an organization. If you have a lot of these machines, they're managed today with Microsoft Intune. You have them, you're managing all the different settings and components, but they're still on Windows 10 and you need to get them to Windows 11. So using the power of feature updates and the policies as you create them, you can actually push these updates to the machine and force the machine to upgrade to the latest Windows 11 version. Now, you can obviously jump from Windows 10 to Windows 11, say 23H2 or 24H2, and you can choose that. And there's different advantages, right? And something I like to always talk about now with the latest announcements is Windows 11 24H2 will now support hot patching. Hot patching allows you to update your machines and push these security updates without requiring a reboot on that machine. To me, that's great and amazing because it allows for you to update these machines more or less kind of silently without even requiring a reboot, right? Because I know that's a big pain point for many organizations is, rebooting these machines, especially if they're working during the day. Well, auto patch helps you solve that, of course, on any, security update that actually is hot patch capable. So there's going to be many, many times where these patches can be pushed without upgrade. So it gives more added motivation to get to that Windows 11 24H2 state. Now, in addition, in Intune, there's the Windows Autopatch service. The Autopatch service is actually kind of takes some of that control and passes it to Microsoft. So it actually runs the updates for you more as a service, right? So you don't actually have to go in and create these different update rings. You don't have to kind of set these deferral periods, set these feature update policies. You actually just enroll your devices into the Autopatch service. You put them in different groups depending on, when you have your test group and then you have your, initial group and then you have your subsequent groups, right? So you batch them and you put them in different groups. And then the auto patch service kind of handles all this process for you. It creates these update ring, it creates these feature updates, it creates the reporting, really kind of streamlines your entire update process. So you don't actually have to manage it at all. Now it gives less granular control. So for those organizations who have a lot of different types of device groups, a lot of different locations, it might not necessarily be a fit for you if you actually want to control and kind of time some of these update processes. But it alleviates you from ever having to manage these update rings and modify them and create these feature updates. So there's really a lot of power in using AutoPatch. So if you haven't actually used the AutoPatch service, it's something you want to explore. If you're using Windows Update for Business, you can actually onboard some of your update rings to the AutoPatch service and kind of facilitate that. And you can slowly start moving your machines to the AutoPatch service. So if you haven't looked at it, something great for you to look at. And you can even use if you're if you have a smaller org, right, and you're not using Windows Update for Business to actually update your devices, you can start with, directly into the Autopilot service and grow your device and let the service actually get all your updates running. And then, of course, update your Windows 10 clients to Windows 11. In this demo, I want to actually show you the Intune Admin Center and kind of show you the options available with Windows Update and how to manage these updates. And we're going to look at the update rings and then how we can actually create a feature update policy and apply it to our device group in order to trigger that update from Windows 10 to Windows 11. So here we are in our Intune Blade, and we are at the Windows and Devices, and we go down to Windows Update. So first thing we see is our update ring. And if we look down in our update ring, we have different settings and configuration that's available. So we have things like, obviously allowing the product updates. We have a driver update policy, which really isn't important in this case. And then we have a couple different settings, right? Here we have, um, our quality update deferral. I talked about that. Our feature update deferral. I have the automatic update behavior, which you can control how you want that to process. If you want to notify the user of download, if you want to automatically update, right? So there's a lot of different features and options available. So I'm going to open this blade up here and show you some of these options, right? So we see, I already have it pre-configured. I'm allowing product updates, right? And I'm also, I have different automatic update behaviors. If you want to auto install at maintenance time, right? If I want to, automatically install and restart at a scheduled time, right? Things like that, and reboot if I want to auto install and reboot. So depending on your different device groups, you can actually control these settings, and you might have multiple update rings for your different device groups, right? So what's important here? So this kind of generalizes the whole quality update in that process. What I want to show you is how you can apply that feature update, right? So the update ring in general, if you specify a time period and you specify a deferral, you don't have control here on which feature update you want to actually push down. So once we kind of create this update ring, this pushes down all of those different settings onto our devices. Now, if we kind of switch over from device updates to our feature updates. Here we can actually create that policy to tell it, besides quality update, what are the feature updates we want to push on our device groups. This is going to help you with your Windows 10 clients or even your Windows 11 clients if they're on, say, 22H2 and you want to get them to 24H2. Or if you have your Windows 10 clients and you want to get them to 24H2. Well, how do you get there? What type of control do you have? Here is where we actually go in and create that policy. So in this case, I want to get all my devices to 24H2. That's my goal, right? Whether they're on Windows 10 22H2 or whether they're on, Windows 11 23H2, I want to have a feature update policy that's going to get them to Windows 11 24H2. So I'm going to create my policy. I'm going to call it Windows 24H2, feature update. And, I'm going to name that. I'm going to provide a description, feature update policy to update devices to Windows 11 24H2. And then I'm going to come down here and on the drop down, I'm going to have different features. Now you can cap this. So if you have specific devices, let's say that you want to max them out at 23H2, you can create a feature update policy and assign it to that device group. That means that that device group, the maximum feature update they will get is 23H2. In this example, I want to actually get all my devices to 24H2. So I specify that and I want to make it required, right? I don't want to give the user that control. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to require that. And then I want to make sure, I can also say if a device is ineligible to get to Windows 11, at least get them to the latest Windows 10 feature update. In this case, I'm going to leave that unchecked because I want to get them to 24H2. So I don't want to even kind of give that option to stay on Windows 10 when possible to kind of get there, right? And then in my rollout options, here I can actually specify to do it gradually, right? For a test, what you could do is apply it as soon as possible, right? You can apply it to a specific group, and in order for you to properly test it, you can apply it right away, and then you could create a subsequent policy for your different device groups and deploy it gradually on different dates, so you can kind of spread out. So if you have a lot of endpoints, you don't want to get them all updated at the same time, right? Even though your update ring still has some control as far as the automatic update behavior, things like that, you can still control it. So in this case, I'm going to make my update available as soon as possible because I'm going to test it. I'm going to add my group. I have a group of, all devices as an example. I'm just going to say all Windows devices. I want to get them to 24H2. I'm going to include it, create next, and create. Now, this process obviously takes some time to replicate. Feature update policy has to replicate down to your devices. But as this is scheduled right now, the policy is created, it will eventually push down to my devices. And not immediately, but over the coming days, you'll see that this feature update will successfully push down, and slowly your devices will start to get that 24H2 update if they're compatible, of course, if there's no issues with getting to Windows 11 as an example, it'll push down and it'll trigger that update process. And depending on your auto update behavior and your auto install behavior, it will process that and then reboot it at a specific time. So it's kind of showed you, I hope this helped you kind of understand kind of how to use and how to create your policy to trigger that update from, whatever, if it's Windows 10, 22H2 or Windows 21, Windows 11 23H2 the latest version, which is Windows 11 24H2, and of course, take advantage of the auto patch capability of Windows 11 24H2.
Now we're going to look at device provisioning using Windows Autopilot in Microsoft Intune. And we're going to look at a couple scenarios. First one being, provisioning net new machines with Windows 11 and as they're going through the out-of-box experience and how we can automate that using the power of Windows Autopilot. And then we're going to also look at repurposing existing machines, which I'm sure many of you have, right? And you want to reissue that machine. So instead of, same process, instead of, shipping that and re-imaging that machine, how we can use the power of Windows Autopilot to repurpose that existing machine. So we'll look at that, and then we'll look at a demo, right? What it looks like for the end user, and as they're kind of going through that out-of-box experience, how that process is streamlined for the end user. And we'll look at that scenario in a demo. So what is Windows Autopilot? So think of Windows Autopilot as a set of technologies that helps us pre-configure, new machines and or repurpose existing machines, right? So think of your typical environment, right? For all of us, when you're reimaging, how are you doing machines, right? You're basically, you have like your help desk staff that's, has, an image, they get the device, they ship it to the office, somebody goes in and reimages that, installs all the apps, runs a bunch of different scripts, right? So every organization has a different onboarding process, right? Imagine a way for you to automate all of that, right? Imagine a way for you to automate that process, have all your apps being deployed, have, any configuration pushed on that machine. If you have any scripts that you want to run on that machine to perform some action, imagine being able to automate that. That's where the power of Windows Autopilot comes into play. Once it kind of streamlines that, once the user is automating that onboarding experience, once the machine is, back in, then you use the power of Intune for additional capabilities like, Windows Update for Business to be able to push the updates onto the machine for quality updates, for feature updates, and do a lot more on that machine and fully manage that machine. But the power of Windows Autopilot really helps that initial automation of that out-of-box experience. And you bring in all your apps, your configuration, and the user is up and running without IT really needing to touch that machine. To me, I find that extremely valuable. I mean, in our organization, every time we get a new machine, imagine having to have somebody sit there having to re-image it. It could save you tons of time, right? If there was a way for you to streamline that. That's where you have everything configured in Microsoft Intune, you have your policies, you have your profiles configured. You just ship that machine off to the user. The user, logs in as normal after they go through that, out-of-box experience. Then they're in their machine, they have their apps, and they're up and running without necessarily needing to contact IT. So brings in a lot of power for your organization, and we'll see what that looks like for the end user as they're kind of going through that out-of-box experience and how that automated process looks like for the end user. Now let's look at some, remote actions, right? So there's a lot of different remote actions you can do on existing devices, and different actions apply to different, platforms, right? So we're looking at Windows, there's different options, including autopilot reset, including fresh start, including wipe, right? And if it's mobile devices, there's different types of options. If you have remote help, there's also options for like remote assistance, things like that. So there's a lot of different remote actions you can perform in Intune. Now, in our webinar here, we're going to kind of talk about the fresh start process, what that means, right? And we're going to see that in real life, like if we apply a fresh start to the machine, what's going to happen. So an existing machine that kind of went through the autopilot experience, went through the out of box experience, user was using that machine. Now you need to give that machine off to a new user. We're going to see what that fresh start process looks like and how, again, the power of Windows Autopilot comes in to kind of streamline that. Here we have a table where we kind of show the different use cases for all the different remote actions. So depending on your use case, right? Depending on where the machine is at, depending on, if what happened with that machine. Let's say if you just want to remove unwanted software, you need there's a problem with the OS and you will need to reset it. You need to repurpose it, right? You need to refresh it. It's at end of life, right? Or you need to basically restore that device. Something's wrong, it doesn't have all your configuration, apps are missing, the OS got corrupted. There's a lot of reasons. These are all common scenarios you see, right? In many organizations, right? Users kind of open a help desk ticket. They say something's not right, my updates aren't pushing in, my apps aren't installing, something's wrong with the OS. There's a lot of, that use case, right? So that's going to happen. We see it all the time, right? And imagine there being a way for you to automate that. Imagine for you to be able to kind of go to that device and go to the Intune Blade and see that device and say, okay, now I see there's a problem with this device. I'm just going to fresh start it and let it start from scratch, and then let the user log in again, let it go through that out of box experience. Now, once you do that, that same out of box experience, that same automation that you have kicks in again. So you don't have to worry, oh, what's going to happen after reset? Now, one of the concerns is what happens with possibly local data, right? So that's where if you use Intune and you can say redirect your desktop, your documents, and your pictures folder, you redirect that to the user's OneDrive. So essentially, the user really doesn't have any local data on that machine, and any apps that they have installed will get pushed down through Intune. Your configuration will get pushed down through Intune, and even if you have to reset that, there's no worry about loss of data, right? Like I'll give you a real world example. I had a problem with my machine, like something wasn't operating correctly. I decided I'm just gonna fresh start my machine. I fresh started it. I logged in net new. Once I'm logged in, I had OneDrive redirection, all the stuff I had on my desktop, everything I had in my documents, everything came back and I was up and running pretty much right away. Teams installed, my Outlook installed. So I didn't have to worry, oh, I'm going to lose my data. I need to copy my data to a flash drive or something, right? The olden days, a lot of that had to happen with the way things are automated and how everything's so modernized using, Intune and having all the different configuration. And then once that automated process of autopilot kicks in, I was signed in, everything kind of came down, all my apps got installed. So it's a really streamlined way of, performing that let's say reimaging, right, of that machine without, lost data. And we'll kind of see that scenario coming up when we kind of go through that demo. Now, the first scenario I talked about, like I talked about some of the reset options with Windows, right? So the first quick way is the autopilot reset. Now, autopilot reset is used imagine a scenario where, you issued a machine and everything was working correctly, no issues, all the apps were pushed down, and, you need to give that machine to a new user. So what do you normally do, right? Normally you have the user, sign out and then the new user comes and signs in, but you're thinking to yourself, well, what about that user's data? What about if that personal data on that machine? What do I need to do? I don't want to kind of re-image this process. I want a quick way to reissue it to a new user, have them sign in and be up and running. Well, that's when the autopilot reset comes in, right? It's a quick way for you to make that machine back to a business ready state. The user kind of signs in onto that machine, and they're up and running, right? So the autopilot reset is a quick way, keeps the same OS, keeps the same apps, and it's a quick way for you to reissue that machine to a new user. User comes in, signs in as themselves, and they're up and running. So that's one of the remote actions and one of the kind of refresh options that you can use with autopilot. It's called autopilot reset. Now, you heard me mention, autopilot fresh start, right? Fresh start kind of is a start from scratch. As the name sounds, like what would it mean for a fresh start? Imagine a case similar, you have to repurpose this device, or let's say that it's the same user, but they're saying that, oh, I'm having a lot of problems, right? Something's not right with my machine. You notice in Intune a bunch of configurations aren't pulling down. The OS, has some bloatware on there you want to get rid of, right? Things like that, right? So there's, multiple issues with that machine. So autopilot reset wouldn't be applicable here, right? Because, autopilot reset assumes that everything's normal. You're just kind of giving it to a new user. In this case, it can be the same user or new user, or even if you have to repurpose it. Let's say it's been stale for a week or two, or it's been dormant for a month, and you want to kind of start it from over. You don't know what policies it have, what apps it has. You want to kind of start over. That's where you use the power of autopilot fresh start, right? Fresh start will, one of the biggest cons obviously is it's more time consuming. It takes some time, as it has to depend on the recovery environment. Recover windows kind of go through that. But that's a big con versus using like autopilot reset. Now there's a lot of pros, obviously, removing the bloatware, kind of starting from scratch, like, so you know, you want to kind of start from scratch, and you can choose to keep the device enrollment status or completely unenroll it and go through that process, right? So there's different pros and cons to the scenario. So depending on your refresh process or your reset cycle, you can really use whichever one you find as more applicable. So I like to use, again, in my scenario that I had problems with my machine, right? I mean, if something wasn't working correctly, I didn't want to use autopilot reset. I wanted to kind of start from scratch and have everything kind of re-download. That's where I used fresh start, and all my bloatware, everything got removed, and I was able to have a net new machine, and I was up and running. So depending on your scenario, you might look at autopilot reset, or you might look at fresh start, and kind of what that experience is like. So that was my favorite part of the presentation, where we get into demos, so we can actually showcase some of this technology. So you heard me talk a lot about, autopilot. I talked about the power of autopilot. I talked about the reset options. Now let's see it in action. So we're going to see a couple different scenarios. The first scenario, user receives their new laptop, goes through the out-of-box experience. So we'll kind of see what that looks like as they set up MFA, as they set up their Windows Hello for Business pin, and they get, up and running on their machine. In the second scenario, we'll look at initiating that, reset option, right? I talked about, autopilot reset. I talked about fresh start. So we'll look at an example of performing a fresh start on a machine, and what happens from the admin perspective, how that's initiated, and what actually happens on the actual machine as that fresh start process is initiated. So we'll look at both, and we'll see what happens as it's going through the process. All right, everybody, in this first demo, we have a net new machine. User just received their laptop. They signed into their Wi-Fi, and after kind of going through that process, now the machine is on checking for updates. So it's checking for a few updates from the backend, and we'll kind of see what that looks like for the user as they transition into the sign-on page. So this kind of they'll see the screen first as they're kind of going through that initial onboarding process, right? So expect that, they'll see maybe possibly one or two restarts, and eventually it will actually go to the sign-on page. So we'll see that shortly. All right, here we are back on our machine, and the machine just restarted. So we're back up and running, and we got a message that some updates are on the way. So it does some minor updates, and brings the machine back to the out-of-box experience. And once we're here, kind of goes through a couple of checks and balances, and then eventually the user will see the sign-on page, and we'll see that shortly. So there we are. So I got issued the sign-on page. Now, if you have your own company logo, it will actually show a customized logo. So the user will be familiar that they're actually logging into a company machine. So here we have Alex, and they're signing into their machine for the first time. So Alex, has their username and starts beginning to type their username here. So Alex says, okay, I'm going to go ahead and sign in. My username is AlexW, and they'll sign in. And they were issued their password, so they'll go ahead and sign in with their password. And once they're kind of going through that, it says, okay, you need to set up your MFA. I'm like, great. So I get this prompt here on my screen. So I kind of go through that process. I take out my phone. I do the whole authenticator process. Pretty simple, straightforward process. So we'll see that shortly as it comes up on the screen. We'll kind of go through that process. I open my authenticator app on my phone. I go through the next process. I'll scan the QR code on the bottom here. Once I do that, adds it to my phone, like you normally do as you're kind of going through setting up MFA for the first time. And then we'll kind of scroll down a little bit. We'll say, okay, everything's good. Go ahead and hit next. I get a code on my phone, and once I authenticate, it actually sets up my MFA, right? So this is my first time signing in, hence that's why I got the MFA. It says, okay, great, you've been approved. Your sign-on method has been configured. So now what we see is the machine kind of stops there and it kind of goes through the setup process. This is where the user generally will kind of sit through as it's going through that initial out-of-box experience. We configured as an admin, we configured the automation of the out-of-box experience. So you see you didn't get any end user license agreement or other information, all was hidden. Now we'll actually take you to what's called the enrollment status page. And here we are. So it goes through a couple steps. It goes through the device preparation step. It goes through the device setup process and the account setup process. So that generally, depending on the organization, can take anywhere from about 10 to 15 minutes or so. Sometimes a little bit longer, really depends on the apps that you're deploying, but generally it streamlines this process fairly quickly. It does a lot in the background, including, um, registering with your tenant, creating that Enter ID joined object, registering with Intune MDM, pushing down all your policies, installing any apps. All that's configured. Again, this is where the power of Autopilot comes in, right? All of these policies, all these things we actually have pre-configured, right? We have all of these processes, we have all these apps. If we have any certificates, if we have any policies, now we'll apply any device level policies, and then it will apply any user level policies. And same with apps. If you have any apps that are targeted to the device versus apps that are targeted to the user, they'll apply again at different times, and it'll kind of go through, and it'll give the user information as to where they're at in the process. So user actually sees that something is happening rather than kind of seeing a blank page. And I generally recommend having the enrollment status page because when you don't have it, the user kind of doesn't know what's going on. And if there's any errors or something doesn't complete correctly, at least the user is able to inform you to let you know, hey, something is stuck or it's not performing as I was expecting. So this process will kind of continue and we'll kind of uh, go through the steps as we're seeing here. So here we are as the machine is kind of continuing the out-of-box experience. So as you can see, the device preparation step and the device setup completed. Now we're on to the account setup page. Here it's doing any account specific configuration. So like I mentioned, if you have anything that's targeting the actual user. So if you have any policies, any apps that you're deploying or anything that you directly tie to the user, this is the step where all of that is actually occurring. So as we can see here, we have uh, we have a lot of different things that are again occurring. So joining your org, which already completed, any policies, any certs, or anything else that you're pushing down through Intune. So if you have any scripts that you run, anything at all, really, all of that stuff, it tries to perform that during this initial autopilot and this out-of-box experience, right? So it's going to continue this process again, depending on the number of policies and depending on the number of apps that you have might dictate how long it takes, but you want to try to minimize the onboarding. So you don't want to have too much occurring in this step. So just be kind of cognizant in that realm. All right, here we are now. The user process completed. Now I'm at a page where it's asking me to set up my Windows Hello for Business PIN. So I go ahead and click OK. It notifies me that I have to set up my PIN. I go ahead and choose a Windows Hello for Business PIN. I confirm it. And once I do that, it actually sets that up for me. And moving forward, I can actually use that to sign in. Now, if you had a camera and if you had, biometrics or any other biometrics option and you allowed that as an organization, the user will be able to set that up, will set up their face, right? Or, fingerprint, whatever it is that they have on their machine, they're able to kind of set that up and use that to sign in moving forward. So they don't have to use a password. That's why I personally love Windows Hello for Business, and it stores. And you might ask, well, we set up a pin. Does that mean that that pin can be used on any machine? Well, actually, the pin itself is stored locally on the TPM chip on that machine. So it's only good on the machine. So from a security standpoint, if somebody has access to that pin, there's really no risk because they can't use that pin to sign in onto any other machine. All that's encrypted, what keys locally on the TPM chip, and it uses that pin to decrypt that and then of course allow that user to sign in. So it gives a great sign-in experience for the user, and by us including that in our initial configuration, the user sets it up the first time they sign in, and it's a seamless sign-on process. So once I hit OK, now I'm up and running on my Windows machine, as you can see here. So my machine is up and running. I'm able to kind of go in. I see that my company portal app has been deployed. I see that I have the company portal app. I have all my Office apps, and I'm up and running, right? So I can launch the, Windows app, Word app, I'm sorry. I launch that, be up and running. I can kind of get into my email. If I open up my email, I can quickly set up my email and I'm up and running, right, fairly quickly. And then if you have anything else or any other apps that you deploy, that will slowly come in. And in this example, right, we required that the company portal and the M365 apps to be deployed upon first login. So that's why you notice that it was, pushed down. If you have other apps and things like that that you want to push down, but you don't necessarily want to push it down during that out-of-box experience, just to make it a little bit faster, you can kind of do that. You can kind of not require those, so those will come down over time. So great part is I set up my Outlook. See, I'm up and running, right? So now I want to launch any other app. If I launch Teams, things like that, all of that will kind of come in and, I'm operational without requiring anything else. So it's a great part. User kind of, is up and running fairly quickly and automated that entire onboarding process, and all my policies, all my apps got deployed onto the machine.
All right, everybody, here we are at the device blade. And I mentioned earlier about the different reset options, right? We were looking at we talked about the fresh start option. We also talked about autopilot reset and the different scenarios and the different use cases for using either option. So here we are at the devices blade, and in this demo, I want to actually go through and initiate a fresh start on this machine. So we want to see what will happen on that machine, what that experience will be like on this machine, right? In my example, the machine in question had some issues, and we want to kind of fresh start that so that we can have it reinstall all the different applications, repush all the configurations and all the different settings. Now, of course, you'll have different use cases for why you want to use fresh start. You might also be in a scenario where you want to reissue this machine to a whole new user. So depending on the use case, but in either way, we're gonna initiate. You'd want to initiate that fresh start process. Now, we also talked about the autopilot reset, and where you would actually apply the autopilot reset. So that's also an option, and that you will use when there is no issues with the machine at all, and all you really need to do is have a different user come in and actually sign in. So it's a lot quicker, but it doesn't reinitiate, it doesn't re-enroll the device in Intune, right? And when we do a fresh start, it actually creates a whole new device name, and kind of goes through that entire out-of-box experience. So we're going to kind of demo that and see what's going to happen. So I want to show you the devices blade here. You have your familiar options with, that you see in Intune. And then on the top here, these are the device actions. We have things like retire, we have things like wipe, delete. If you ever need to initiate a sync from the Intune blade, this is how you do it. If you need to force a restart, if you need to run diagnostics and collect diagnosis, this is how you can do it. Now here we have our fresh start option, and if we go to here, we also have other options for running scans if it's using Defender for endpoint, and other things if you're using Labs to rotate the local admin password and rotate the BitLocker key and other components like renaming device, things like that. So in this example, I'm going to go ahead and initiate a fresh start. So once I do that, I'm going to get a message that this will clean up the device and remove all the applications and reinitiate the reset on this device. Now, there is an option to retain user data if you choose to do that. In my case, I don't want to retain any user data. I want it to completely wipe, remove all the software, remove all the apps, and basically reconfigure it from scratch, push everything back onto this machine. So once I go ahead and do that, I'm going to go ahead and click on yes, and we're going to see a message down below. If I reset, it will actually say clean Windows device pending, and then it will initiate the reset on the device. So now let's kind of switch over to our device and let's see what the experience is like on the device. All right, now here we are at our device. So once we initiated that reset process, it actually restarted the machine. It sent a message to the machine. It restarted it, and now it's going through the reset cycle. So what this will do is it'll actually reset the entire Windows, and it will, of course, depend on the Windows recovery environment being intact. So assuming that that's the case, assuming that there's no issues, it will start this process. So this is kind of going through and wiping the user data, wiping the machine, and kind of setting it to a fresh state in order for us to reinstall Windows. Once this reset process completes, it will hit the second stage. In the second stage, that's where it's actually installing the Windows OS on it. So in theory, it did have it. So by install, it's actually reinstalling that Windows OS on this device. So once it does that and completes that second step, from there, it will bring us back to our normal out of box experience. From there, it will kind of go through that checking for update cycle that we saw on the other demo when I was showcasing the autopilot process. Once it does that, then it'll be back at our sign-in page, either the same user or if it's being issued to a new user, the new user will sign in and it'll go through the normal out-of-box experience, and then it'll bring it back to the desktop with all the apps and it'll be ready for the next user to use. So this process can take anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, roughly, depending on the speed of the machine, depending on the hard drive speed and size, memory, and processor, and all those things. So as you know, with Windows, a lot of that's going to be important. So we'll see this in this process. It's essentially just going to kind of go through that reset process. So once we initiated that reset and we went through the resetting process, now here we are at the installing Windows, as I mentioned. So here it's going to actually reinstall the operating system using that recovery environment. So once it does that, this process is fairly quick. So once it completes that and it's all done, then we'll be back at our out-of-box experience and we'll kind of continue the normal login cycle as we saw when we went through the autopilot. So it's kind of a three-step process. We initiate the fresh start from the tenant. We wait for it to pull down to the machine. Once the machine pulls that down, gets that signal, it initiates and kicks off the process, kicks off the reset, reinstalls the OS, and then we're back at the autopilot screen and kind of continue with that out-of-box experience. So this concludes this portion of the demo as we went through the fresh start process. So thank you so much, Lai.
So we've provided some best practices and considerations when it comes to Windows 11 upgrades, as well as utilizing Windows Autopilot for device preparation. And these are based off of some of our learnings and our experiences when it comes to these two major components. So for Windows 11 upgrades, some of the challenges that we have seen when it comes to this process is we know that there's device compatibility and hardware requirements in which not all devices will meet those hardware requirements and be compatible with an upgrade. And every organization that we work with, there's bound to be a certain number of devices that cannot be upgraded, right? And so our best practice and recommendation on this is to make sure that you inventory your devices and evaluate compatibility with some test and pilot devices first, but then also use the built-in tools that Intune has, such as endpoint analytics, to really perform an assessment of all your devices prior to the upgrade, right? You want to make sure that you understand which devices can be upgraded, which devices cannot be, to really plan it out accordingly and target the ones you can upgrade, replace the ones that you cannot, or look at the other different options we mentioned for the ones that is must stay on Windows 10. In addition, we see that there's a challenge to reduce the user and business impact, right? Doing an upgrade for the most part is should not be that impactful, especially if you're doing it properly and you're approaching it in a very systematic approach. However, if done improperly, there are potential issues, right, when it comes to performing these upgrades, right, where you potentially need to fall back or roll back some of the configurations. We know that not all departments work the same hours and can have the upgrade performed at the same time. And so therefore our best practice when it comes to performing upgrades is to consider performing a staggered upgrade across the organization. Don't roll it all out at once, right? Pick certain pick certain departments, certain branches and so forth, but stagger within those departments and branches too. All right. For example, let's say you want to target the HR department, right? Target 25% of the users in the HR department on one day, and then another 25% the next day, and so forth, right? Don't put all of them all in one batch and transition or get them upgraded all at the same day in the same hours, right? Monitor and track the deployment through Intune. Make sure that you're checking on the progress, making sure that you address any of the potential failures and noting down and making sure that you remediate some of those failures. And then, as mentioned, have a fallback plan to roll back to Windows 10 if necessary, right? Um, and make sure that you're able to address those potential scenarios quickly and bring it back in the case if you need to, right? An additional challenge is updating devices that are unaccounted or unenrolled, right? Devices that are very legacy devices that are not connected to Intune, that are sitting in that closet that is still running, but is not getting the necessary updates. So, what happens in those scenarios, right? We learned that not all devices will by default enroll into Intune, right? Even if you deploy all the automatic enrollment capabilities that Intune provides, there are certain hardware and software requirements where that device itself may be not connected and is not enrolling into Intune, and you will not be able to get an inventory in Intune of that device, right? So in that scenario, our best practice recommendation is to target all the enrolled devices first. Make sure that you can get all the enrolled devices accounted for and get them updated or at least identified. And then from there, you can then go through and scour any of your old legacy devices and utilize in that scenario if that device is not able to be upgraded, then utilize the extended security updates to continue having support for that device while you look at alternative options to potentially replacing those devices. In terms of Windows Autopilot, right, with the challenges, learnings, and best practices around Windows Autopilot, we often see that a lot of organizations mention that they need to have hybrid join devices to support the use of on-premise apps and services. What we notice or what we've learned is, however, that not all customers may necessarily require hybrid join devices because they may not quite understand the alternative options that are available when it comes to hybrid joint, right? They may not realize that there are certain capabilities and features outside of Intune that can support and provide an alternative option than leveraging hybrid joint devices, right? So our recommendation is to evaluate all the requirements when it comes to hybrid joint and really consider different options For example, transitioning to SaaS-based applications to reduce any dependency to on-premise um, Active Directory, or look into Cloud Kernel Trust to provide authentication to applications that are on premise, right? Microsoft's recommendation is for modern devices is to be native Entra joined, right? And to move away from the traditional hybrid joined because with hybrid joined, things such as device setup and preparation is much more difficult than Entra joined. So look into seeing if Entra joined, native Entra joined is a potential option for organizations, and really evaluate the need of hybrid and see where that lies, right? In addition, what we are seeing is when it comes to device preparation, there's numerous applications that need to be pushed into devices. And most of the time, these applications require some custom configuration, or they're very large in size and need to be and not able to be pushed out in a timely manner, and can definitely delay the device onboarding process, right? So that being said, what we recommend is to pre-provision and set up devices before they reach end users. Preload any applications, any large applications and settings if you can, right, prior to deploying it and implementing autopilot on those devices. Or alternatively, you can then wait to deploy those large applications post the enrollment, right? Get all the necessary um, basic services and basic applications and policies um, to allow the user to get onto the device, and then push the larger applications that they may not use readily or right away um, at a later point, right? And the third item we see is shared device deployments is quite prevalent in a lot of organizations, especially if they have frontline workers. We know that shared devices is something that, for the most part, cannot be removed because organizations rely on that shared device scenario for none of, for their non-power users, and it doesn't make sense for those organizations to assign dedicated devices to users that barely are on their devices, right? And so with that, what our recommendation is to switch to device-based licensing, right? So Intune does have a device-based licensing option where you can target and assign device-based licensing to devices rather than the user licensing using user affinity. So there is an option to purchase those licenses and make it device-based. You can also leverage autopilot with the self-deploy mode to implement and deploy devices in the kiosk fashion for the shared devices, and also consider leveraging the device enrollment manager if you want to enroll devices in bulk without utilizing end user or without utilizing a license and a device limitation from the end users, right? Device enrollment manager essentially just needs the one license for that account, and then you can trigger an enrollment on all the devices by using that same account and logging onto those devices. So just a recap from our both our discussions and our webinars, really, what are the final thoughts and kind of key takeaways when it comes to Intune device management for Windows, Windows 10 upgrades and so forth. So the first thing we want to mention is Intune is a proven product that enhances efficiency and productivity when it comes to both users as well as IT teams, alongside also reducing the overall costs to manage devices in a enterprise environment, right? So with the Forrester um, report we showed in the previous webinar, uh, organizations that leverage Intune can see a drastic reduce in costs, but really improving that end user efficiency and productivity as well. Intune also improves device security posture while still supporting the flexible work arrangement. In the modern day world where a lot of workers are hybrid or remote, Intune provides that capability to really give users access to the necessary resources they need uh, while working from home, working from remote and so forth, right? And then lastly, Windows 10 end of life is approaching fast. It's only about 7 months away, right? But 7 months is a very short time frame when it comes to getting all your devices upgraded, right, to Windows 11. So we definitely recommend acting fast on this and making sure that you have a plan when it comes to refreshing or upgrading your devices, or at least have a plan to address those security risk and security components when it comes to Windows 10 end of life. So what's next? How do we continue the journey to modernizing endpoint management? And this is similar to what we had before, but so what we can do here at Revanti is we can help organizations and provide a comprehensive assessment of their existing device management posture, their existing Windows 10 platform, and really providing a prioritized list of the findings and recommendations for your organization. In addition, if you're not using Intune and the capabilities of Intune right now, we can help implement a pilot of Intune as well as a full production rollout of Intune. So that way you can really observe and get all the capabilities of that Intune provides. Um, and for those organizations that are already on Intune, we can still help you uncover some of the capabilities and features that you may not be utilizing, but it is part of your Intune license package, right? And potentially, we can also help organizations look into the Intune suite capabilities and deploy and implement some of those additional capabilities that Intune suite has that is on top of what Intune device management has. So provided is our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions and would like to see some potential demos or discuss a potential service offering for us to come help with any potential activities when it comes to Intune and device management.